You think you can eliminate someone just because they don't fit your new vision? Imagine firing her right before the deadline for the only regulatory filing she's authorized to sign, then watching federal regulators slam your company with a $5 million bomb. I was there. I was the bomb. And the best part? They called me a legacy expense right before they handed me the match to light their own funeral pyre. My name is Megan Rowland, and for 15 years, I was the invisible shield between North Shore Dynamics and federal prison. Compliance Director. They called it, though what it really meant was memorizing every regulation that could sink an energy company faster than you could say environmental violation. I was 42, owned a modest townhouse in Queen Anne, and had the kind of institutional knowledge that should have made me untouchable. Should have. That Monday morning started like any other. Seattle's October rain hammered the conference room windows as I settled into my usual spot, third chair from the head of the table. Close enough to matter. Far enough to observe. I had my leather portfolio open, the same one I'd carried since 2008, pages already marked with the week's critical deadlines. Top of the list, Form 72H for our liquefied gas storage permits. 10 days to file. My signature required. Then Travis Kane walked in. 35 years old, Stanford MBA, and our new CEO as of exactly 3 weeks ago. He wore those Italian loafers without socks, even in October, and carried his coffee in a mug that said, "Move fast and break things." His hair was perfectly disheveled in that way that costs $200 at a salon. And he had this habit of air-quoting everything like the world was one big inside joke, only he understood. "Good morning, team," he announced, not bothering to sit. Today, we're going to talk about sunsets. I watched my colleagues exchange glances. Jennifer from operations mouthed, "What?" to David from finance. Travis clicked to his first slide, a photo of a cassette tape. "This," he said, pointing with his laser pointer like he was giving a TED Talk, "is what our current compliance infrastructure looks like. Legacy systems, legacy thinking, legacy." His eyes found mine. Expenses. The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. "We're sunsetting the old guard," he continued, his smile never wavering. "Everything's moving to the cloud, automated workflows, AI-driven compliance. The future doesn't need filing cabinets and binders." I kept my expression neutral, but my pen pressed harder against the paper. In my 15 years, I'd seen 4 CEOs come and go. Each one thought they'd revolutionize everything. The difference was, the others had at least pretended to respect what came before. "Megan," Travis said suddenly, and every head turned to me. "You've been here since, what? 2009. 2008, I corrected quietly. "Right. The cassette era." He got a few nervous chuckles from the newer hires. "Tell me, when was the last time you innovated a process?" I could have mentioned the 17 federal audits I'd shepherded us through without a single violation. Could have brought up the $3.2 million in fines I'd helped us avoid just last quarter. Instead, I simply said, "Last Tuesday, I consolidated 3 redundant filing systems into one." "Filing systems," he repeated, making it sound like I'd said stone tablets. "See, this is exactly what I mean. We're not a filing company. We're an energy company. Energy." He pumped his fist like he was at a motivational seminar. The meeting dragged on for another 40 minutes. Travis unveiled his Vision 2025, a hodgepodge of buzzwords and flowcharts that somehow managed to eliminate my entire department while leveraging synergies with an app that didn't exist yet. When someone asked about federal compliance requirements, he actually said, and I quote, "Regulations are just suggestions with teeth. We'll pull those teeth." I opened a fresh notebook after the meeting, wrote insurance on the cover in careful block letters. Then I began documenting everything. Because here's what Travis didn't know. What his Stanford MBA and Silicon Valley connections hadn't taught him. In the energy sector, regulations aren't suggestions. They're commandments carved in legal stone. And I was the only one in the building who knew the ancient language they were written in. More importantly, I was the only one authorized to sign Form 72H. The federal government had my biometric data, my signature exemplars, my personal federal ID number that couldn't be transferred or delegated. It was like having the only key to a vault that, if left locked for more than 10 days, would automatically trigger a $5 million penalty. Travis wanted to sunset the old guard? Fine. But he was about to learn that some things, like federal compliance for hazardous materials, don't care about your disruption timeline. I closed my portfolio and headed back to my office, my sensible heels clicking against the polished concrete floors of our open-concept workspace. Behind me, I heard Travis telling someone about how compliance was just fear-based thinking. 10 days, I thought. Pulling up the Form 72H on my screen, the countdown had already begun. The transformation began immediately. By Tuesday, Travis had installed a ping-pong table where the compliance filing cabinets used to be. By Wednesday, he'd replaced our mandatory safety meetings with innovation hours where we brainstormed ways to disrupt ourselves before someone else does. But it was Thursday when things got interesting. Legacy Meg, Travis's voice boomed across the open office. I looked up from my computer where I was reviewing the latest EPA guidelines that could cost us millions if ignored. He was standing by the elevator with a group of fresh-faced consultants from some firm called Future Forward Solutions. I didn't respond to the nickname, just kept typing. Legacy Meg, come show these folks our ancient filing rituals, he called out, getting laughs from his entourage. I stood, smoothed my blazer, and walked over with the kind of measured pace that made him wait. It's Megan, I said quietly. And those ancient rituals kept us compliant through 3 federal investigations. Exactly my point. Travis spun to face his consultants like he'd just proven something profound. Fear-based thinking, we're so worried about investigations, we forget to innovate. One of the consultants, a woman who couldn't have been older than 25, piped up. Mr. Kane is right. Modern companies operate on trust architecture, not defensive documentation. Trust architecture. I wrote that down in my insurance notebook later, right under regulations are suggestions with teeth. The real showstopper came during Friday's all-hands meeting. Travis had set up what he called a simplification station in the main conference room. The idea was to bring any redundant paperwork for immediate shredding. Visual progress, he announced, feeding someone's old training manuals into the industrial shredder he'd rented specifically for this theater. Every page we destroy is a step toward efficiency. I watched from the back as employees reluctantly brought forward old documents. Most were genuinely useless. Outdated phone lists, duplicate copies of ancient memos. Then Travis grabbed a thick binder from the compliance shelf. Look at this monster, he said, holding it up like a trophy kill. Material safety data sheets for ammonia gas. 300 pages. For something we've been storing for 20 years without incident. My blood went cold. Travis, wait. The shredder roared to life, eating the federally mandated documentation with mechanical efficiency. That's required by OSHA, I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Was required, he corrected, brushing paper dust off his hands. Now it's simplified. If OSHA wants to know about our ammonia, they can check our cloud summary. 1 page. Beautiful. I opened my notebook and wrote, October 15th, 2:47 p.m. CEO destroyed mandatory MSDS documentation for Class 2.3 toxic gas. Witnesses, approximately 40 employees. The weekend gave me time to review my situation with clarity. Travis had made his intentions crystal clear. I was a legacy expense to be sunset along with everything else he deemed obsolete. The smart move would be to update my resume, reach out to my network, find a soft landing before he found an excuse to push me out. But then I pulled up Form 72H on my home computer. There it was in subsection 7.4. 2. This form must be completed and submitted by the designated compliance officer registered with the Department of Energy. Signature authority is non-transferable and requires biometric verification. I was the only designated officer. My biometric data, fingerprints, retinal scan, Even my typing pattern was encoded in the federal system. It had taken 6 months of background checks and security clearances to get that designation. Travis could fire me tomorrow, but he couldn't transfer that authority. Not in 10 days, not in 10 months. The bureaucracy moved at its own pace. Sunday evening, I got a text from Sophie in finance. Heads up, saw a rec for your replacement. They're interviewing next week. I sat in my home office, looking at the family photos on my desk. My nephew's graduation, my sister's wedding, my late father in his Boeing uniform, proud of his firstborn's corporate success. They all seemed to be asking the same question. What are you going to do? I opened my insurance notebook and began creating a timeline. Every quote, every destroyed document, every innovation that violated federal law. I wasn't building a case. That would imply I planned to fight. No, I was simply documenting reality. If Travis wanted to operate in his own universe where regulations were suggestions, fine. But reality has a way of asserting itself, especially when that reality involves a $5 million federal fine for missing a filing deadline that only I could meet. I poured myself a glass of wine and made a decision. I wouldn't warn him again. I'd done my due diligence in the meeting. It was documented. If the CEO of an energy company didn't understand the importance of federal compliance, that wasn't my problem. Well, it wouldn't be my problem much longer. The wine was a good Malbec, rich and complex with a slight bite at the finish. Rather appropriate, I thought, raising my glass to the empty room. To innovation, I said aloud, may it get exactly what it deserves. Friday arrived with the kind of pristine Seattle morning that mocked what was about to happen. I wore my best suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, the one I saved for federal audits. If this was going to be my execution, I'd dress for the occasion. At 4:47 p.m., Travis's assistant knocked on my office door. He wants to see you in Conference Room C. Conference Room C, the one with glass walls, visible to the entire floor, the one we called the fishbowl. Of course. Travis was already there when I arrived, leaning against the table with studied casualness. No HR representative, no witness. Just him in his ridiculous sockless loafers and a t-shirt that probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobe. Megan, he said, not bothering with pleasantries. Let's not make this harder than it needs to be. I sat down, placed my hands flat on the table, and waited. I'd learned long ago that silence was sometimes the best response. Your role has become redundant, he continued, sliding a manila envelope across the table. We're eliminating the compliance director position effective immediately. This is 2 weeks severance, which, frankly, is generous considering you're an at-will employee. I didn't touch the envelope. What about the federal filings? Already handled. We've contracted with an AI-powered compliance firm. They'll manage everything through their platform. The Form 72H? He waved dismissively. It's all automated now. The system will handle it. I could have explained that Form 72H couldn't be automated, could have mentioned that my biometric signature was required by federal law, could have warned him about the 10-day deadline now just 8 days away. Instead, I picked up the envelope and looked inside. 2 weeks' pay for 15 years of service. You have an hour to clear your office, Travis said, already checking his phone. Security will escort you out after that. I'll need to transfer my federal credentials, I said calmly. Just leave everything with IT. They'll handle the transition. I stood up, straightened my jacket, and headed for the door. Then I turned back. Travis, the Form 72H is no longer your concern. He cut me off. You're a legacy expense. Megan, we've moved on. Back in my office, I worked methodically. Personal items went into a banker's box. The photo of my father, my collection of compliance award plaques, the coffee mug from our 2018 perfect safety record. Then I turned to my files. The 2 original Form 72H packets, already signed and dated for this quarter, sat in my locked drawer. These were the physical copies required by the DOE, complete with raised seals and my biometric verification stamp. I slipped them into my briefcase between 2 folders of personal documentation. Nobody asked what I was taking. Why would they? I was just Legacy Meg, cleaning out her obsolete paper files. My final act was logging into the federal portal. My credentials still worked, they wouldn't expire for another 30 days. I navigated to my profile and systematically removed my biometric data from the company's authorized signature system. It was my data, after all. My fingerprints, my retinal scan. The system asked for confirmation 3 times. Removing biometric authorization will prevent any filing of Form 72H until new credentials are established. This process typically takes 90–120 days. Are you sure? Yes. 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 Before leaving, I placed a single post-it note on my monitor. Call DOE within 8 days regarding Form 72H. Security arrived exactly an hour later. A kind man named Marcus who'd always waved hello in the mornings. "I'm sorry about this, Ms. Rowland," he said quietly as we waited for the elevator. "Don't be, Marcus. It's not your fault." As we walked through the lobby, I saw Travis through the glass walls of the main conference room, gesticulating wildly to his future-forward consultants. Someone had drawn a rocket ship on the whiteboard with "To the Moon" written underneath. Marcus walked me to my car, shook my hand, and said, "This place won't be the same without you." "No," I agreed, loading my banker's box into the trunk. "It certainly won't." Driving home, I didn't feel angry or sad. I felt anticipatory, like the moment before lightning strikes, when the air goes electric and still. 8 days. The DOE would send their first notice in 8 days. Then things would get interesting. At home, I placed the signed Form 72H packets in my filing cabinet next to my insurance notebook. Evidence of what could have been filed. If only someone had asked. If only someone had listened. If only someone hadn't called me a legacy expense and shown me the door. I poured myself a cup of tea, Earl Grey, nothing fancy, and stood at my kitchen window, watching the Seattle skyline darken as lights began twinkling on. Somewhere in that maze of glass and steel, Travis was probably celebrating his successful simplification of the company, probably toasting with craft beer to the elimination of dead weight. I raised my teacup in a mock toast of my own. "To automation," I said to my reflection. "May it work exactly as well as you think it will." 8 days. The countdown had begun, and I was no longer on the clock. I was just a private citizen now, drinking tea in my kitchen, with absolutely no obligation to warn anyone about anything. After all, I was just a legacy expense, and everyone knows those aren't worth keeping around. Saturday morning, 7 days remaining. I woke to rain pattering against my bedroom window and made myself a proper breakfast. Scrambled eggs, sourdough toast, fresh strawberries from the farmer's market. No rushed coffee and granola bar eaten at my desk while reviewing federal guidelines. Just breakfast, eaten slowly, with NPR playing softly in the background. My garden needed attention. The October roses were still blooming, defiant against the Seattle autumn, and the weeds had taken advantage of my recent distraction. I spent 3 hours in the dirt, pruning, planting bulbs for spring, talking to my plants like they were old friends. The physical work felt good, clean, honest. "You're looking better," my neighbor Helen called over the fence. "Haven't seen you home on a Saturday in ages." "Career change," I said, not elaborating. Sunday, 6 days remaining. I drove to Pike Place Market, bought fresh salmon, vegetables I'd never had time to cook properly. At the bookstore, I picked up a novel, actual fiction, not another compliance manual or regulatory update. The cashier, a young man with kind eyes, said, "Good choice. That author really knows how to build suspense." I'm developing an appreciation for that. I told him. Monday. 5 days remaining. My phone stayed eerily quiet. 15 years of being the first person called for any crisis. And now, nothing. I imagined Travis in his Monday morning meeting, probably announcing how much more efficient everything was now that they'd streamlined operations. I wondered if anyone had noticed the post-it note yet. I pulled up LinkedIn on my laptop, watching former colleagues update their profiles with increasing frequency. Excited to announce I'm exploring new opportunities. Was corporate speak for help? I've been laid off too. Travis was cleaning house. Apparently, I was just the first course. Tuesday. 4 days remaining. I found myself at my computer at exactly 10 a.m., my usual time for handling Form 72H. My fingers literally itched to log into the federal portal, to file the form that was sitting, completed and signed, in my filing cabinet. Muscle memory is a powerful thing. Instead, I closed the laptop and went to yoga class. You seem tense, the instructor said, adjusting my shoulders during warrior pose. Just waiting for something, I said. Waiting is the hardest pose, she replied. And I almost laughed at the unintended wisdom. Wednesday, 3 days remaining. Sophie from finance texted, "Hey, weird question. Someone from IT is asking about Form 72 something. Nobody knows what they're talking about. Wasn't that your area?" I stared at the message for a full minute before responding. I'm no longer with the company. They should check with Travis. He told them to figure it out themselves. Said it should all be automated. I didn't respond. What was there to say? That evening, I pulled out my insurance notebook and reviewed my documentation. Every dated entry, every quoted statement, every reckless decision. It read like a tragedy where everyone could see the iceberg except the captain. Thursday, 2 days remaining. The rain had turned into a proper Pacific Northwest storm, the kind that floods streets and knocks down power lines. I made soup, watched the water streak down my windows, and thought about Travis's move fast and break things mug. Some things, when broken, come with a $5 million price tag. My phone rang at 8 p.m. Unknown number. Ms. Rowland, this is James from IT at North Shore. I'm sorry to bother you, but we're trying to file something called Form 72H, and the system says only you can. I'm no longer an employee, I interrupted gently. I can't help with company business. But the system won't accept anyone else's credentials. It keeps saying biometric authentication failed, and, James, I was terminated last Friday. Any company business needs to go through proper channels. Ma'am, please. Travis is breathing down my neck, and this thing is due tomorrow. Then Travis should have thought of that before he eliminated my position. Goodbye, James. I hung up and turned off my phone. Friday. 1 day remaining. The storm had passed, leaving that crystalline clarity that follows Seattle rain. I spent the morning reading my novel on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket, drinking tea that wasn't getting cold while I handled someone else's emergency. At exactly 4:47 p.m., 1 week to the minute since Travis had called me a legacy expense, I opened my laptop and navigated to the Department of Energy's public filing portal. I watched the Form 72H status for North Shore Dynamics tick from pending to overdue. A strange peace settled over me. It wasn't revenge, exactly. It was just consequences, arriving with the mechanical precision of federal bureaucracy. Travis believed in disruption, in moving fast, in breaking things. He was about to learn that some things break back. I poured myself a glass of wine, the good stuff, a 2015 Bordeaux I'd been saving, and sat on my porch as the sun set over Puget Sound. Somewhere across the city, panic was probably setting in at North Shore Dynamics. Emergency meetings being called, IT staff frantically Googling federal filing requirements. Travis learning that his AI-powered compliance firm couldn't actually file forms that required biometric authentication from a person he'd just fired. The counter in my mind clicked over. 0 days remaining. Time's up. Saturday morning arrived with deceptive calm. I was repotting orchids when my phone buzzed. Sophie again. Megan, holy shit, Doe just sent a notice. Something about Form 72H not being filed. Travis is losing his mind. I set down my gardening shears, careful not to damage the delicate roots I was working with. That's unfortunate. Unfortunate? Megan, they're saying potential fines up to $5 million. The orchid's roots were more tangled than I'd thought. I gently separated them, taking my time. Sophie, I'm not an employee anymore. This isn't my problem. You're right, but you must have filed it before you left. right? Maybe it's just lost in the system. I was terminated at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday. The form wasn't due until yesterday. There was a long pause. I could practically hear the gears turning in Sophie's head. Oh my God. Megan, they fired you before. Sophie, I need to go. These orchids need attention. I hung up and put my phone on silent. Through my kitchen window, I could see Helen next door hanging laundry. Normal Saturday activities for normal people who didn't have federal authorization to prevent corporate catastrophes. By noon, the calls were coming every few minutes. I recognized some numbers, former colleagues, HR, even the company lawyer. Others were unknown, probably Travis or his consultants. I let them all go to voicemail while I made myself a leisurely lunch. Caprese salad with heirloom tomatoes from my garden, fresh mozzarella, basil I'd grown myself, simple, honest, real. The first voicemail I listened to was from Travis himself, recorded at 11:43 a.m. Megan, it's Travis. There seems to be some confusion about a filing. Call me back immediately. No please, no apology, just an order, like I still worked for him. The second was from HR, 12:15 p.m. Ms. Dear Roland, we need to discuss your exit documentation urgently. There may have been an oversight regarding transition of duties. An oversight, that was one way to put it. The third was from James in IT, 12:47 p.m., speaking in a rapid whisper. Ms. Roland, I'm supposed to tell you Travis wants you to call, but honestly, I just wanted to warn you. He's talking about suing you for sabotage. Says you deliberately didn't mention the form. I know that's bullshit. I saw your post-it note myself before someone threw it away. Just be careful. I saved that one. By 3 p.m., I decided to check my email. 17 messages from North Shore addresses, each more frantic than the last. The subject lines evolved like a documentary of panic. Quick question about Form 72H. Urgent, Form 72H issue. Critical, need immediate response. Legal notice, demand for information. The last one was from the company lawyer. I opened it out of curiosity. It was full of legal threats about deliberate withholding of critical information and sabotage of company operations. At the bottom, in what I assumed was meant to be intimidating bold font, you are required to respond within 24 hours. Required? By whom? I wasn't their employee. I had no contractual obligations. I forwarded the email to my own lawyer with a simple note. FYI, they're panicking. She responded within an hour. Let them. You documented your warnings. You left a note. You were terminated before the deadline. You're in the clear. Also, sabotage? Please. Sabotage requires action. You literally did nothing. Exactly. I did nothing. And sometimes nothing is its own form of action. That evening, I pulled out the signed Form 72H from my filing cabinet. There it was, completed perfectly, every field filled out, my biometric stamp gleaming silver on the signature line. Ready to file. If only I'd still been an employee when it was due. If only someone had asked about it during my termination. If only the CEO hadn't been so confident that everything was automated. I photographed it carefully, making sure the date stamp was visible, showing it was prepared before my termination. Then I put it back in the cabinet, evidence that I hadn't sabotaged anything. I'd done my job right up until the moment they told me to stop. My phone rang again. This time it was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer. Ms. Roland, this is Deputy Director Patricia Hemsworth from the Department of Energy. My spine straightened involuntarily. Yes. We're following up on the missed Form 72H filing from North Shore Dynamics. Our records show you as the authorized signatory. I was. Until I was terminated last Friday. I see. And the form was due yesterday? Correct. Was the company aware of this deadline? I looked at my insurance notebook, then at the photograph of the post-it note I'd taken with my phone before leaving. Yes, it was on my priority list for the week I was terminated. I also left a note reminding them to call your office. Would you be willing to provide documentation of that? Of course. There was a pause. Then Deputy Director Hemsworth said something that made me smile for the first time all week. Ms. Rowland, one more question. Did anyone at North Shore ask you about Form 72H during your termination? No. I was told my concerns were, and I quote, no longer relevant. I was called a legacy expense and given 1 hour to leave the building. I see. Thank you. Ms. Rowland. We'll be in touch if we need anything else. After she hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, watching the sun set through the window. Somewhere in the city, Travis was probably on a conference call with lawyers, board members, maybe even federal investigators. The Department of Energy didn't just fine companies, they investigated them. They asked uncomfortable questions about why critical safety filings were missed, who made what decisions, what documents were destroyed at simplification stations. I made myself a cup of tea and took it out to the porch. The evening air was crisp, autumn sweet with the smell of fallen leaves. Helen was in her garden, and she waved. You look relaxed, she called over. I'm learning to appreciate timing, I replied. And I was. The timing of consequences. The timing of truth. The timing of a federal government that doesn't care about your disruption timeline when safety regulations are involved. Monday morning brought the kind of corporate earthquake that registers on the Richter scale of business disasters. The official DOE notice had arrived at North Shore Dynamics, $5 million in temporary fines, pending investigation. Sophie texted me a photo of the letter. It was beautiful in its bureaucratic brutality. Failure to file Form 72H constitutes a severe breach of hazardous material storage regulations. Immediate temporary penalties. Potential criminal investigation for willful negligence. My phone rang. The company lawyer again. Ms. Rowland, we need you to come in immediately to fix this situation. I don't work there anymore. We'll pay you as a consultant. Name your rate. I almost laughed. I can't file Form 72H retroactively. That would be fraud. Then file it now. Late. Take responsibility for the delay. Take responsibility for a delay that happened after I was terminated? That would also be fraud. His voice turned sharp. You're the only one who can file it. You have an obligation. I had an obligation, past tense. It ended at 4:47 p.m. last Friday when Travis called me a legacy expense and had security escort me out. We'll sue you. For what? Not working for free after being fired? The line went dead. Tuesday's all-hands meeting was held over Zoom. Apparently, the conference room was occupied by federal investigators. Someone recorded it and sent it to me. I shouldn't have watched, but I couldn't resist. Travis stood at his desk, his usual swagger replaced by something that looked like fear. His sockless loafers were gone, replaced by actual dress shoes. The move fast and break things mug was nowhere to be seen. Team, he began, his voice cracking slightly. We're facing a temporary regulatory challenge. The DOE has misunderstood our innovative approach to compliance. Someone off-camera asked, Is it true about the $5 million fine? It's a temporary assessment pending review. Another voice. Why didn't Megan file the form before she left? Travis's jaw tightened. Ms. Rowland abandoned her responsibilities without proper transition. That's when the VP of Legal, Barbara Chen Morrison, spoke up. I'd always respected Barbara. She was one of the few executives who actually understood regulations. Travis, I've reviewed the termination documentation. Megan was terminated before the filing deadline. She had no opportunity to complete it. She should have mentioned it. She did. Barbara's voice was ice. I found 3 emails from her in the weeks before termination, flagging the Form 72H deadline. You responded to one saying, and I quote, "Stop fear-mongering with fake deadlines." The call went quiet. Furthermore, Barbara continued, it found a post-it note in the garbage with Megan's handwriting, photographed by security cameras, telling us to call the DOE within 8 days. You threw it away yourself. according to the timestamp. Wednesday brought a new development. The DOE had discovered something interesting during their investigation. A Form 72H submitted late with an electronic signature purporting to be mine. Deputy Director Hemsworth called me personally. Ms. Rowland, did you submit a Form 72H on Monday of this week? No, I'm no longer an employee. Someone submitted one with your name and what appears to be a forged biometric signature. My blood went cold. That's identity theft and fraud. Yes, it is. We'll need you to come in and provide a statement. After I hung up, I pulled out my insurance notebook and added a new entry. Attempted forgery of federal documents using my credentials. Thursday, the news broke publicly. Seattle Energy Company faces $5 million fine for safety violations, read the Seattle Times headline. The article was devastating, mentioning not just the missed deadline, but the attempted cover-up through document forgery. My LinkedIn exploded with messages from recruiters, former colleagues, and, surprisingly, competitors offering me positions. Turns out, being the compliance director who got fired right before a massive federal fine makes you very attractive to companies that actually value compliance. One message stood out from the CEO of Cascade Energy Solutions. Ms. Rowland, we've followed your career for years. Recent events suggest you might be available. We'd love to discuss our Chief Compliance Officer position. We promise no one here uses the phrase legacy expense except about actual equipment. Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after my termination. I sat in my lawyer's office as she reviewed the latest communication from North Shore. They're offering you a settlement, she said, barely suppressing a grin. Full severance package for 1 year, plus damages in exchange for not pursuing wrongful termination. How much in damages? $500,000. I stared at the number. Why would they? Because the board found out Travis tried to forge your signature on federal documents. He's been placed on administrative leave. Also, she slid another paper across. The DOE is recommending reduced fines if the company can demonstrate they've taken corrective action. Reinstating you would be considered corrective action. They want me back? Desperately. The board is offering you Travis's position. I looked out the window at the Seattle skyline, at the building where I'd spent 15 years keeping disasters at bay, only to be dismissed as obsolete. No, I said quietly, but I'll take the settlement, and I'll consider consulting, at 5 times my previous hourly rate, to help them establish proper compliance protocols. With a new CEO who understands that some expenses aren't legacy, they're insurance. My lawyer smiled. I'll draft the counter-offer. Anything else? I thought about Travis, probably sitting at home in his expensive loungewear. His disruption dreams disrupted by federal reality. Yes. Any consulting agreement should specify that I work remotely. I've gotten rather fond of my garden. The board meeting minutes were leaked to me by someone who remained anonymous, though the email came from a Proton Mail account with the subject line, "You deserve to know." I opened the PDF over my morning coffee and nearly choked on my first sip. The attempted forgery of Ms. Rowland's signature constitutes a federal crime. Barbara Chen Morrison was quoted as saying, "Our own investigation found that Mr. Kane instructed IT to just sign it as Megan when they couldn't access the system. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was deliberate fraud." The board chair's response was devastating in its simplicity. How did we hire someone who thought forging federal documents was an acceptable solution? By Monday, 3 board members had resigned. The stock price had dropped 12%, and the DOE had expanded their investigation to include systemic compliance failures and potential criminal misconduct. That afternoon, I received a call from someone unexpected, Marcus, the security guard who'd escorted me out. "Ms. Rowland, I wanted you to know. I kept something." His voice was low, conspiratorial. "That day you left, after you were gone, Mr. Kane came down and told me to destroy any papers you might have left behind. But I'd already seen you take everything. Then he asked specifically about any sticky notes. It felt wrong. so I took a photo of your note before he grabbed it. Marcus, that's... I sent it to the DOE investigators yesterday. Thought you should know. The investigation moved with shocking speed after that. Tuesday brought federal agents to North Shore's offices. Wednesday saw them leaving with boxes of documents, or what was left after Travis's simplification station shredding party. Thursday, the DOE announced they were considering criminal charges for willful endangerment and document destruction. But it was Friday when the real bomb dropped. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story. The $5 million Post-it note. How a fired compliance officer's warning exposed corporate recklessness. They'd gotten everything. The legacy expense comment. The destroyed MSDS sheets. The mockery of federal regulations as fear-based thinking. But most damning was a quote from an unnamed North Shore employee. Travis literally said, "Regulations are for companies that can't innovate their way out of problems." He thought he was smarter than the system. My phone rang. It was Deputy Director Hemsworth. Ms. Rowland. I wanted to inform you that our investigation has completely exonerated you. In fact, your documentation has been invaluable. We're recommending you for a Federal Excellence in Compliance Award. I nearly dropped the phone. What? Your meticulous records, the warning note, maintaining your documentation even after termination. It's textbook professional ethics. Also, her voice warmed slightly. That Post-it note has become something of a legend here. We're using it in our training materials as an example of due diligence. That evening, I sat in my garden as the sun set. My phone finally quiet after a week of chaos. The roses I'd pruned were blooming beautifully. Proof that sometimes cutting away dead weight lets healthy growth flourish. Sophie texted me one last update. Travis officially terminated for cause, no severance. Board statement mentions gross negligence and criminal conduct. Also, they're implementing something called the Rowland Protocol, mandatory compliance exit interviews for any termination involving regulatory positions. I poured myself a glass of the good wine and thought about legacy. Travis had called me a legacy expense, something outdated and unnecessary. But legacy, real legacy, isn't about being old or new. It's about what you leave behind. He'd left behind a $5 million fine, a criminal investigation, and a company in chaos. I'd left behind a Post-it note that saved my reputation and exposed the truth. In my filing cabinet, the signed Form 72H still sat in its folder, never to be filed. I'd kept it as insurance, but I didn't need it anymore. The empty space where it should have been filed had said everything that needed to be said. My neighbor Helen appeared at the fence. "See, you made the news again," she said, holding up her tablet with the WSJ article. "That young man got what he deserved." "Why, he got what he earned," I corrected gently. "There's a difference." "What's next for you?" I thought about the job offers, the consulting opportunities, the vindication of everything I'd stood for during 15 years in the trenches of corporate compliance. "I'm thinking of writing a book," I said. "A guide to compliance for tech bros who think they can disrupt federal law." Helen laughed. "What'll you call it?" I smiled, raising my wine glass to the sunset. "Move fast and pay fines. A legacy expenses guide to federal reality." The DOE had sent me a frame-worthy copy of their final determination letter. At the bottom, someone had handwritten a note. "Thank you for your service to safety compliance. Your legacy protected more people than you know." Travis had been right about one thing. I was part of the old guard, the cassette tape in his digital world. But cassette tapes, for all their obsolescence, had one advantage. They left a physical record that couldn't be deleted with a keystroke or lost in a cloud failure. Sometimes, being a legacy expense means you're the only one who remembers why the expenses existed in the first place. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Cascade Energy Solutions, my new Chief Compliance Officer badge catching the morning light. The settlement from North Shore had been generous, but I'd discovered something during my garden sabbatical. I actually missed the work. Not the politics, not the disrespect, but the actual work of keeping companies safe and compliant. The Wall Street Journal had done a follow-up story. Travis Kane had been charged with federal document fraud, conspiracy to deceive regulators, and willful endangerment. His lawyer argued for leniency, claiming his client was just an innovative thinker who made mistakes. The judge apparently was unmoved. 30 months in federal prison and a lifetime ban from serving as an officer in any company handling hazardous materials. The morning Travis reported to prison, someone sent me a photo. He was walking up the courthouse steps, head down, wearing a suit that finally had socks to match. No swagger, no air quotes. Just a man facing the consequences of believing he was above the law. The photo came with a message from Barbara Chen Morrison, now CEO of North Shore Dynamics. Thought you'd want to see this. P.S. We've renamed the compliance department Critical Infrastructure. No one calls it Legacy anymore. I printed the photo and tucked it into my insurance notebook, the final entry in that particular chapter. But the real ending came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was reviewing safety protocols at Cascade when my assistant knocked. Ms. Rowland, there's someone here to see you. Says he's from your old company. It was James from IT, holding a small box. Ms. Rowland, he said, almost shyly. I wanted to bring you this personally. He opened the box, revealing a small plaque. It was the Post-it note, the one Marcus had photographed, preserved in acrylic like a museum piece. Below it, a brass plate read, "The most expensive sticky note in corporate history," a reminder that compliance is never optional. The Employee Association had it made, James explained. It's hanging in the main conference room now. But we wanted you to have the original, well, a replica of the original. The real one is evidence in federal court. I held the preserved Post-it, this tiny yellow square that had toppled an executive and saved a company from itself. 8 words. Call DOE within 8 days regarding Form 72H. Thank you, James, I said, meaning it. How are things there now? Different. Better. Barbara actually listens when we raise concerns, and nobody uses the word disruption anymore without legal reviewing it first. He paused. You know what the new hires call the whole incident? I raised an eyebrow. The Rowland revenge, though Barbara prefers the compliance checkmate. After he left, I placed the plaque on my desk, next to my father's photo. He would have been proud, I think. Not of the revenge, he was never vindictive, but of the standing firm, of letting the truth have its day. My phone buzzed. A LinkedIn notification. Travis Kane had updated his profile. Seeking new opportunities in innovation consulting, specializing in learning from failure. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then I remembered him calling me Legacy Meg in front of 40 people, remembered the dismissive wave when I tried to warn him about Form 72H, remembered legacy expense delivered with such casual cruelty. I opened my bottom drawer and pulled out one last document, the original Form 72H, still perfectly completed, still bearing my biometric seal, still unfiled. I'd kept it as a memento, but now it felt like holding on to old grief. I fed it into the shredder, watching the silver seal disappear into ribbons. The past was properly filed. The present had work to do. That evening, I attended an industry conference on compliance innovation. Yes, that's a real thing. The keynote speaker referenced the North Shore incident as a cautionary tale. When she put up a slide of my Post-it note, the audience of 500 compliance professionals actually applauded. During the Q&A, someone asked, "What would you say to executives who think compliance is just bureaucratic overhead?" The speaker smiled. I'd tell them about a CEO who thought he could innovate his way around federal law. He called his compliance director a legacy expense and fired her before a critical deadline. It cost his company $5 million, his freedom, and his career. The compliance director? She's now one of the most respected CCOs in the industry. So you tell me, who was the real expense? I slipped out during the applause, not wanting the attention. In the parking garage, I sat in my car for a moment, processing the strange journey from humiliation to vindication. My phone lit up with a text from my sister. Saw the news about your old boss heading to prison. Karma? I thought about it, then typed back, not karma, just paperwork. Properly filed paperwork. She sent back a laughing emoji and one word. Savage. Maybe. But sometimes the most savage thing you can do is simply step back and let someone face the natural consequences of their choices. Travis had thought he was playing chess while the rest of us were playing checkers. He just never realized that in the game of federal compliance, the board itself has rules, and those rules don't care about your Harvard MBA or your Silicon Valley connections. I started my car and headed home to my garden, to my life that no longer revolved around emergency calls and weekend crisis management. As I drove past North Shore's building, I noticed something different. The lobby art installation, the one Travis had installed. All sharp angles and disruption had been replaced. The new installation was a series of interconnected gears, each one necessary for the others to turn. Legacy infrastructure, indeed. Thank you so much for listening to this story of corporate checkmate. I hope you enjoyed this tale of how one legacy expense turned a pink slip into a $5 million lesson in humility. Where are you listening to this story from? Drop a comment below. I'd love to connect with listeners from around the world. If this story of sweet corporate revenge resonated with you, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever witnessed karma in the workplace? Let me know in the comments.